Well, welcome to everyone out there watching on YouTube. I'm Zach Snow, and you may recognize me from the Celtic Wake Up and from places like CBC, VOCM, VOWR, and a whole lot more. This is my brand new project called Musical Connections. It'll be exploring the Newfoundland and Labrador music industry in further detail. I'll be interviewing musicians from a multitude of genres, whether it be rock, pop, folk, jazz, blues, you name it, no genre is off limits. And I'm also going to talk to some industry professionals that make this scene what it is, that are really the glue to the Newfoundland and Labrador music sector, whether it be producers, managers, venue operators, you name it, and we'll have it for you. Well, I'll be introducing you to my first guest of the Musical Connections podcast, which you can hear every Friday at 12 noon on your streaming services, Apple and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts too. It'll be with Ken Tizzard. Now, we recorded this a couple of weeks ago, and we were lucky to be down at the Battery Cafe, so a big shout out to them for letting us use the space. He was in town for a series of shows at the Ship Pub, which is his first time here in the province since 2019. We talked about everything. We talked about how it felt to be back in Newfoundland for the first time in a long time, his work with Big Wreck, Thornley, The Watchmen, how he got started, and his work with the man of 1,000 songs, Ron Hynes. And we also talk about multiple sclerosis, as he's a big advocate of that since his wife has been dealing with multiple sclerosis for many, many years now, and very, very tough bout of multiple sclerosis that she's dealing with. Plus, we go into music for goats and the Whiskey Wednesday show. There's a lot to take on in this interview, so sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Ken Tizzard. Hello there, and welcome to the Musical Connections podcast video edition. If you're just joining us on YouTube, welcome aboard. If you're listening to us now on your podcasting services, welcome back. Well, joining me right now for my very first guest on the Musical Connections podcast, this guy is back here on the island for the first time in 3 years. He's played with the likes of Thornley, Big Wreck, his own group, The Watchmen, and with the man of 1,000 songs himself, Ron Hynes. And he's got a brand new band out for about 2 or 3 years or so called Music for Goats. He's also the host of the Whiskey Wednesday show, the Whiskey Wednesday podcast, and by the time that we're recording this, he's here for a little mini tour at the Ship Pub here in St. John's for the first time in 3 years. Ken Tizzard joins me as my first interview of the Musical Connections podcast.
So good.
You can tell I'm pretty excited because I'm really getting this project underway, and no better way to start out than with you, sir.
That's awesome, Zach. It's amazing that you're doing this.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate it, and welcome back.
Man, it's so good to be back. It's so good to be back. I've had two breakfasts in a row now of Toutons and fish cakes, and I think I might need to find a leaf of salad somewhere. It's great to be back, though.
Yeah. So, where's your go-to place for fish and chips?
Fish and chips. Okay, well, I love the fish and chips, but I'm actually a fan of the chicken and chips and Leo's. Leo's Chicken and Chips is where I go. But if I'm doing fish and chips, I'll usually hit one of the Chess's outlets or the Scampers up by the mall. And there's a place called By the Bay out near St. Philip's, and they got good fish and chips out there as well.
Okay.
But that all being said, when we got here on Thursday night, I rounded everybody up and I said, let's go down to Leduc and have a big old feed of fish and chips down there. And we went down to Leduc and I had a hot turkey sandwich that night. That was
nice.
Good. Yeah, I figured I didn't want to get right into the grease, so I went for the hot turkey sandwich.
Like when it comes to fish and chips here in the city, I think the Duke is like the top of the top. I was there a couple of months ago, and their fish and chips were absolutely fantastic.
Duke Kitchen is top notch. Yeah.
Now, as I said in my intro, you've been here for the first time in 3 years, and I mean, that guy's excited for this being the first ever edition of the Musical Connections podcast. But you're back here on the island for the first time in 3 years. How excited are you to be back here on the Rock?
It's always exciting coming back, but what I find more interesting is maybe it's just the way my mind works, but every time I turn my head, I look over and I see a building that, used to be the old fire hall, and I see this that used to be all that. But then I walk a little further and I see Cane's is still there, and that's where I used to go to get 10-cent cigarettes when I was a kid, because they used to sell singles, right? So as I'm walking around, and it's extremely hard when I'm performing, like last night at the Ship, I'm playing songs and I look out and I see somebody I haven't seen in 30 years, and all of a sudden just these memories come back. and I'm singing a song and I'm trying to remember the lyrics and I'm remembering a scene that happened with this person, then I turn away and I see somebody else, and that's kind of what coming home for me is. I mean, as much as it's exciting, it's really about sort of stirring up the old brain and getting those memories going, you know. Before the interview there, I was sitting over on the road there looking at the Four Sisters, you know, sort of remembering all the development that I've seen in the 50 years with those four homes, and it's just about triggering all the old stuff. I've got so much roots in Newfoundland, and you know, Newfoundland will always be my home. When people say where you're from, I always say Newfoundland, even though I haven't been living here for 30 years. But I think being born here and you know, leaving just before I was 20, I had all my firsts here, you know, my first steps, my first school, my first friends, you know, my first love. All of those things happened here first. And I'm not saying there weren't any firsts after that, but, you know, so many of those firsts that you have in your first 20 years that kind of make you who you are, that all happened here. So this place is just a huge part of who I am.
I mean, for people that have come here and have left here and came back, how's it not part of their lives here when they grow up?
I don't know. I mean, and everybody I know leaves and comes back, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I tried many times. I just, for the longest while, I had a career that involved a lot of airplanes. And, you know, I could always get a ticket out of Toronto to wherever I needed to be for $400. From back here, though, you know, you're looking at last-minute tickets to somewhere else, and you're into the thousands. So it was always prohibitive that way. So Toronto made more sense for me. But you know,
because the opportunities are more plentiful there than you would find here in St. John's.
The opportunities and the ability to execute the opportunities too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm in Toronto and somebody says there's something in Calgary, can you make it out for the weekend? You know, and it's Tuesday, I can look online. And it's like, oh, it's a $300 ticket. That's great. You can't do that from here. Last-minute tickets are too expensive. So it's about finding opportunities and being able to make them happen. And for me, it was just easier to do that out of Ontario.
Yeah. Now, going back to Newfoundland for a second, I forgot to mention at the top here, we were recording here at the Battery Cafe, and a huge shout out to them for allowing us to use their space to record the very first conversation for the Musical Connections podcast.
It's very cool.
Now, let's go back in time for a second. What inspired you to, you know, pursue a music career?
Well, I was young. I used to go to the Avalon Mall every weekend. That's what everybody in town used to do. Whether we were in Mount Pearl or St. John's, on Saturday morning, you get up and you get on the Metrobus. I used to get on the Metrobus number 14 and then transfer to number 8, I think it was, down on Elizabeth Avenue. And by 10 o'clock, everybody was in the mall. All the teenagers, all the kids. And there was a games arcade in the mall next to the food court there. And I remember myself and Mike Anderson were there, and I had to be 11 or 12 years old. And there was a guy playing a Space Invaders or something, and he had on a leather jacket, but he had these cut-off leather gloves with all these studs on them.
Oh, wow.
And the studs on the lapels of his jacket, and I thought, that's awesome, man. He looks so cool. And I didn't really know much, I didn't know much about music at the time, and it was about that same time I remember seeing that guy and then going over to the drugstore where they had a magazine rack, and there was like Circus or one of those rock and roll magazines that used to come out, and I think Iron Maiden was on the cover, and they all had leather and studs too, and I went, man, all these people wearing leather and studs are playing music. And I wanted to find, this was before I even played music, it would have been grade 8. I wanted to find some leather gloves and put studs on the knuckles. I thought that'd be really cool. And there was nothing in the mall. So I had to come, I was told, you got to come downtown. There was a place, it was one of the old shops down on Water Street. It was near the games arcade there. And I was told that they had leather studs in there. So I took the bus down and I went and I got these leather studs. And while I was downtown, I found Clark Hancock and Danny Thomas and Sean Dorn. I think that was some of the first people I met, and they belonged to the punk rock community down in St. John's.
Oh, wow.
And in grade 9, so that was where that sort of got me into the music, like what was happening. Like there was this sort of weird fashion thing that drew me into heavy metal music. And then I discovered punk rock, which I loved. And in grade 9, Clark Hancock called me and said, I want to start a punk band. I hear you got a bass. And I had gotten a guitar. I thought it was a guitar from my neighbor that I was babysitting for. And it turns out it was a bass. So I didn't know the difference at the time. So me and Clark Hancock started a hardcore band called Waffet. And we started playing downtown with Schizoid and Tough Justice and all those other people. And there was this amazing scene. And it was... You know, I came from a family that, you know, a sort of middle-class family. Dad was a fireman, Mom worked at the hospital. But there was a little bit of dysfunction there. Dad was an alcoholic. And as a kid, I was tall and gangly. I wasn't good at sports. I wasn't one of the popular kids. I didn't fit in at school. I didn't fit in at home. I didn't fit in with my family. And then all of a sudden I found this culture of about 25 of us that used to hang out, and they all had the same things. So through music and skateboarding and punk rock, we all kind of bonded, and that became my adolescent family, this group of punk rockers down here. And by the time 1983 or 84 hit, there was about 150 of us that would hang out on Atlantic Place steps every day after school. And we'd be there from 3:30 till 6 or 7 at night, and every day on Saturday. And then the skateboarding thing took over that thing as well. And that was sort of how I got into music. And at that point, I realized there was nothing else I wanted to do. It's really, I mean, as much as it's about the music, it's also about the community, the camaraderie, and finally finding a place where I felt like I belonged.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now, you talk about, not fitting in school. I mean, growing up, I didn't really fit in school either. So, I mean, we both have that in common there.
Yeah, it's finding a place to fit in is hard, and especially if you're one of those people that really kind of wants to be yourself. It's easy to kind of follow the trends and dress what everybody's wearing. I remember grade 7 when Jordache jeans came in, and everybody was wearing the tightest Jordache jeans, and we couldn't afford them. And I remember just thinking, if I had some Jordache jeans, I could fit in with everybody. And then I slowly realized after that it's not about what you're wearing. You gotta be able to be yourself.
Exactly.
And that's hard to do as a young person when you're trying to fit into the world.
For sure.
So it's I'm glad I found my niche.
Yeah, I mean, through junior high and high school, I used to wear a lot of echo clothing, hoodies, t-shirts. I used to wear like these New York Yankee ball caps that were like too small for my head, so I actually had to get the size 8 for my head too. It's probably where all the brains were up to.
That's right.
Too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've all had that phase of just trying to fit in, trying to find our niche. And then you said that, you found your niche in punk rock. So what are some of the names that inspired you to, pursue music?
Well, I mean, originally the punk rock scene, thanks to Fred's Records, they used to get in regularly I think it was Thursdays, they used to get their records in. And we'd all, the busloads of kids would go down and pile through, everything from Motorhead, the Dead Kennedys, Stiff Little Fingers, The Clash, Minor Threat, any of those sort of 79 to 84 hardcore bands. That was sort of what really inspired me. And at the time, there was a bunch of bands. There was Schizoid and Tough Justice and Waffet and Public Enemy. And Chris Jarrett and a few of the other boys in the band started a thing called DUPP, which stood for Dead Upturned Puppy Productions. And what we'd do is all the bands would play all year round, and we'd pool all the money, and then once a year we'd bring down a band. So like they brought down DOA, they brought down SNFU, they brought down Deja Voodoo, and these were things that would never happen in Newfoundland, right?
Yeah.
So there was a real DIY scene, and being a part of that still sticks with me today. But yeah, a lot of the early 80s hardcore music is still, even today I went down to the skateboard store downtown, the name of it I can't remember, a really cool spot. Do you know the name of it?
Not off the top of my head,
I can't remember, but I went in and I've been trying to rebuild my vinyl collection, and SNFU is a band that I can't find vinyl for anywhere. And I went in there, I said, any chance you got any SNFU vinyl? He went, I got 2 records in the back, I think. And he went in, he came out with 2
Nice.
records I've been looking for. I'm like, oh my Lord. Had to come to Newfoundland to the skateboard shop to find some old punk rock. But
we got what you came for, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Now, when I was doing research for this conversation, because I knew you'd be in town here, I did list the name of the groups that you were involved with. I mean, you had your Music for Ghosts group, which you're doing that now, which we'll get to later. But the one interesting thing I found was with Big Rag, and they were like a big alternative rock group back in the 90s. So how'd you get involved with those guys?
So I was playing with the Watchmen, and Jake Gold was our manager, and Jake signed this new band from Boston who had a singer from Toronto. And this was 4 Berkeley grads who'd been studying, crazy jazz down in Boston. And Ian Thornley had gone down. That's where he met Dave and Forrest and the full band, and Brian. And so Jake said, there's a new band that I'm managing now. He was managing the Tragically Hip and Us. And he said, I'm bringing a new band in. and they're coming up to do some recording, and we were in recording a record. We were recording, I can't remember which record it was, and we were set up at a studio, and Ian and some of the boys came by, and they loved our setup, so they actually kind of commandeered some of our gear and the studio to do some demos. And we just started hanging out with them and became really close. And then when they put their first record out, we took them on tour. They were on tour with us for about 2 years before the record came out. And when the record came out, it was huge. In Loving Memory, it had like Blown Wide Open and that song on it. And they became, as big as anything. So we did one final tour together across Canada, which was the Watchmen and Big Wreck co-headlining bill with the Mayfield Four. Who's actually was, I don't know if you know Miles Kennedy, he plays with Slash and sings for Slash, and it was Miles Kennedy's early band called the Mayfield Four, and we did I don't know how many arena shows across the country, and it was incredible. And on the last show in Toronto, Ian met my sister. Well, he didn't meet my sister. He saw me talking to my sister, and he said, "Who is that?" I said, "That's my sister." And he said, "Can you introduce me?" I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "She's a nutcase, and you're an alcoholic." And no, I'm not making this happen. And anyways, he pestered me, so I introduced the two of them, and they ended off getting married and having kids.
Oh my God!
So at the end, sort of when Big Wreck was kind of folding down in the late '90s, and the Watchmen were kind of folding down as well, me and Ian were spending a lot of time together, and we were writing together. And Edgefest was happening in 2000 or 1999, I can't remember what it was. And they approached us and said, "Can you guys want to open up Edgefest?" And Green Day and a bunch of other bands were on it. And we said, "Well, we don't even have a band name, like we're just jamming." And so they called us the Super Group because we had the drummer for Edwin and Julie Black, that was Sekou Lumumba, and myself from the Watchmen and Ian from Big Wreck, and we had this new bunch of music, but we didn't have a band. But we played these stuff and opened up Edgefest. And then there was great interest after that. So Ian left Big Wreck. One night we were drinking, and he said, "Let's leave Watchmen and Big Wreck behind and start something new." And I said, "Well, things are kind of folding down anyway, so let's go that way." And we started what became Thornley. And I did the Thornley thing for about 5 years, and that was when I decided to, the end, 5th, 6th year of Thornley is when I kind of decided it wasn't really where I wanted to be anymore. I had young children, I was away still 250 nights a year, and the way the commercial music was changing and that sort of 90s, early 2000s rock thing was just, it was getting a little too homogenized all around.
It was also around that same time too where Napster really came to play.
Everything was changing, so the record companies didn't have money anymore. It was a really weird time in the record business, and I kind of wanted a break from it. So I left, and I didn't know what I was going to do, so I started to learn how to play acoustic guitar and putting some of my songs together, and it occurred to me that, acoustic guitar is kind of like folk music. I love folk music. I'm a big fan of Bob Dylan and Nick Drake, as well as all the actual folkies. So I just started doing that, and the year after that, Big Wreck was still having a hard time finding bass players. So I went back and did a bunch of Big Wreck tours with him as well, which was fun. But I just didn't want to be there anymore. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the story of me and Thornley and Big Wreck. Like we sort of, it was a big family, and Danny has sang on Ian's records as well, and Ian's been part of our records, and it's a bit of an incestuous crowd up there, So yeah, I've been really lucky to have been in the right place at the right time and been prepared. No matter how good you are, you need to be prepared when the opportunity happens.
Absolutely.
And I've been very lucky, and I've had an amazing career in the music business. I haven't had to work a day job my entire life.
Oh, wow.
That doesn't mean that I've had any money, but
you had a good living.
But I haven't been starving. Yeah, even in the early days in the '90s in the Watchmen, and when we were doing lots of touring. We were only taking like $400 a week each, just basically a living wage, because we put so much back into it. The music business requires a lot of collecting of money and then just passing it on. There's not a lot of collecting and putting in your pocket.
Exactly.
And I've never really wanted for much. I'm a pretty simple guy, so I decided early on that money wasn't a factor for me.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you talked about how like the whole Watchmen thing that you've done led you to joining Big Wreck and then forming Thornley. Now let's actually go back to how the Watchmen really first got started. So What inspired you to form that?
Well, the Watchmen were a band. They were around before I joined.
Okay.
So the Watchmen consist of Danny Graves and Sammy Cohn. They're first cousins, a very tight Jewish family in Winnipeg. So like they are, their families are tight. And then there's Joey Serlin, who's also part of the Jewish community, and his family was very tight with him as well. So the three of them have known each other since like preschool. And in high school, they started a band with a bass player named Pete Lowen, and that band became the Watchmen. And Pete did the first McLaren Furnace Room, that first record. And then after touring for a year, when they were just kind of doing the clubs, Peter got married and his wife was pregnant, and he said, "I can't do this anymore." So I was working, I had just gone to Toronto, I was playing with a bunch of Toronto bands, and I was working at Music Express magazine. That's the only job I've ever had. I was the photo editor. And it was a great job because I got to work with photographers like Annie Leibovitz and Herb Ritz and all these amazing, Anton Corbin, shooting bands like Annie Lennox and David Bowie and REM. And
wow.
I got to meet all these bands and work with their photographs and their photographers, and it was awesome.
That's awesome.
But one of the silent investors in the magazine was Alan Gregg, and Alan Gregg is a major Canadian figure, and he's involved in a lot of businesses. And another business that he was involved with was a thing called the Management Trust, which was Jake Gold's management company, and they had the Tragically Hip. And Jake had also just signed this band called the Watchmen. And because I was working at the magazine, and our common thing was Alan Gregg moved the magazine at one point from one office to another, a bigger office, and he wanted the bigger office so he could put the Management Trust office in that space. So I got to know Jake, and one morning I was playing Breakfast TV, which is a Toronto television show.
Oh, love it.
It's a great time, and I had just gotten back from a tour of Russia with a Toronto band that I was with, and we were doing Breakfast TV early in the morning, and then I went to work. And I was in the coffee room, and Jake said, "I thought you were a photographer." And I said, "Well, I'm not really a photographer. I'm a photo editor for the magazine." I said, "But I'm a musician." He said, "Yeah, I saw you on TV this morning." He said, "The Watchmen are looking for a bass player out in Winnipeg." And I said, "No, not a chance." I said, "I'm just still getting settled in from Newfoundland. Last thing I'm going to do now is go to Winnipeg." And he said, "Well, let me fly you out for a weekend and meet the guys and see what happens." And I'd been in Toronto for 3 years, and I'd been playing with a ton of bands, but a lot of the bands there were really focused on, it was a lot of Humber grads, so they were studied musicians, and they knew the business, and it was really much about building something and building the commercial infrastructure and building this. And it was fine, it was a new thing for me. But then I flew out to Winnipeg, and I met these three guys that were it reminded me of being back home in Newfoundland. It was like being in the shed with my old friends jamming. And I kind of went, this is good. This isn't about all the other stuff. This is just about music, and I really like these guys. And I was actually looking for kind of a folk band to play with, and this was obviously not that, but I was still a big fan of REM and Billy Bragg, and that was what heavily inspired early Watchmen stuff. Mm-hmm. And I got along with the guys so well, and at the end of the weekend, they said, "Do you want to be in the band?" And I said, "I think I do."
Yeah, the rest they say is history.
And then, that was in December. I moved out to Winnipeg from December till May. And we wrote and recorded In the Trees, and then it came out in May and immediately went top 10. And we started touring. We did 22 months almost straight before getting a break. And then when the break came, it was time to record another record, and we recorded that. And then that came out, and then it was back on again. And before I knew it, 15, 20 years had passed. It was just like this blur of,
oh yeah,
so again, just putting in the effort and taking chances and trying to follow your instincts and your dreams is kind of worked out for me.
Amen to that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, everyone here knows about the legendary Ron Hynes, the man of 1,000 songs. Of course, playing through the wonderful grand band days and
mm-hmm.
the solo career he went on to have. How did you get to meet Ron Hynes? What was the story behind that?
Well, as a kid growing up, I saw the wonderful grand band on TV, and Ron was one of the first Newfoundland singers that I saw on TV. And I was enamored with him as a child. And when I was 16 or 17, I started dating a girl named Paula Nolan, who was Mercedes Berry's daughter. And Mercedes Berry and Phil played with Figgy Duff. They had a place down on Queens Road, and I had moved down there with them. Me and Paula were living with them. And Mercedes was really good friends with Connie Hynes, Ron's wife. So Ron and Connie were over for dinner a lot. And, I was like a 17-year-old punk rocker. And, we got the drummer for Figgy Duff and or the boron player, depending on what Noel was doing, and Ron Hynes and all the Mike Wade and all this crowd around. And I kind of knew him from a distance. And then I left Newfoundland about the same time that he got his EMI contract. And we were both just kind of passing each other for years. He was doing the folk thing, I was doing the rock thing. And, it was nothing more than, a few conversations over a period of 20 years. I didn't really know him. And then he called me out of the blue and just said, I got 14 shows in Newfoundland and Labrador at the Arts and Culture Centre. I want you to come down and play bass. And I said, what? I said, you've got so many musicians. He said, no, can you do it? And I said, yeah, definitely. And that was how it happened. It was just a random phone call out of nowhere. And I ended up, doing a bunch of shows with him in the last years before he died. I toured with him. It was just me and him, me and him in a car, driving across Ontario, endless hours, night and day, and doing shows. And we just became friends. And so many commonalities in our life, too, right? Being songwriters, going through the record company business, being from Newfoundland. And also having a lot of old common friends. So, we became buddies before he died, and I miss him dearly. And I miss new Ron music. I wish I could hear a new Ron Hynes song now. But,
absolutely. And the last album that he recorded, which was in 2016, that was Later That Same Life. We'll get to that in a moment. But, of course, knowing Ron for such a long time, you must have a great story about Ron. So let us know about one of your favorite Ron stories for us.
Well, I'll tell the story of that leads to the first song we played together. After he called and hired me, I said, that's great. And then he gave me his manager's number, Charles McPhail. So after I got off the phone with Ron, I called Charles and said, Ron's hired me to do these shows. And he said, who are you? I said, Ken Tizzard. He said, no. He said, Ron hasn't hired you to do any shows. I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I just got off the phone with him. He's like, no, you're not doing the shows. Put it out of your mind. I went, oh, okay. So I kind of got off the phone and went, what the hell's going on? And the next day I get a call. I pick up the phone and said, is this Ken? I'm like, yeah. He said, this is Charles McPhail. I said, oh yeah, I remember you. He said, so you're doing some Ron Hynes shows, I hear. I said, oh, you've been talking to Ron, have you? He said, yeah.
Just bad communication on that front.
Exactly. And I said, okay, so Ron told me to talk to you to get details. He said, what do you need? I said, well, I need to know what songs he's playing. I need to know who's in the band. I need to know what gear I need to rent. I need to know what clothes to wear. It's Arts and Culture Center. Is it suit and tie or is it jeans and T-shirt? And all these things. And he said, okay, I'll call Ron and find out. And he got back to me about 10 minutes later. He said, I can't give you any of that information. Ron doesn't give that stuff out. I'm like, what do you mean? I said, I'm coming down to do a bunch of shows with him. He can't tell me what songs we're playing? He said, no, Ron won't do any of that. I'm like, oh, fuck. So he said, don't worry about it. We got a week of rehearsals. I said, okay, that's good. I got a week of rehearsals. So I had 4 weeks to prepare for the shows. So I made charts for every Ron Hynes song I could find. I think it was about 130 of them. Full-on charts so that I could find whatever he was playing and I knew how to play it. And we got down, and the week's worth of rehearsals didn't happen. It turned into one lunch where he ordered for me and then opened up his newspaper for the whole lunch and didn't say a word to me. And then after we were leaving, I dropped him back to the hotel, and I was out of the car standing next to him. He said, I'll tell you one thing, I forgot how tall you are. So when we're on stage, I need you 3 feet over and 5 feet back sitting down. He said, I can't have you standing on stage next to me. I said, okay, Ron. I said, okay, that's the only piece of information I've been given yet is that I'm going to be sitting in a place where I can't see his hands. And then I found out that there was no band. It was just me and him doing the tour as well. So that was terrifying as well, because now I'm doing 1,000-seaters backing them up. I can't see his hands, and I've never played with this guy, and there's no rehearsals.
Oh, man.
So this keeps building like this. And, he kept sort of saying, don't worry, man. I got faith in you. I wouldn't have hired you if I didn't think you could do it. I'm like, okay. I mean, he had more faith in me than I did.
Oh, wow.
So we got to the first night, and we're playing in Marystown. And Ron came in about a half hour before showtime and said, so what do you know? And I said, man, I got a book here. I said, there's 130 songs in here are yours. He said, oh. He said, is that all the arrangements that I recorded? I said, yeah. He said, all the keys I recorded? I said, yeah. I said, this is exactly the way you did them. He went, that's useless. I don't do anything like that anymore. I said, oh my God. I said, Ron, you got to give me something. He said, okay, we're going to start with house tonight. I said, okay, house. I said, are we doing house in D? That's where you recorded it. He said, yeah, we'll do house in D tonight. I thought, okay, I've got one song. That'll give me some chance to get, settled in. I walk out, we walk on stage, and Ron greets the audience, and he turns around to me, and he winks, and he says, "House in D," and I went, "Yeah." And he turned around, and he started playing 1962 in the key of C. And I knew, at that moment, it hit me that Ron Hynes was going to make my life hell for the next 14 shows. But I learned so much in those next 2 weeks working with him about how to listen and follow and how to interpret what was happening. Because I'd come from a world of commercial music where, Thornley could go out and do a set and you could time it almost within 5 seconds of beginning and ending. We had everything exactly the same. We knew what was happening from 1 second to the next. And then to be thrown into a situation with somebody who's, the keys are changing, the arrangements are changing, won't give me any information, but also had faith in me and music that we could make it work, and we did.
Yeah.
It was an amazing musical moment for me, and after being 25 years playing music, to have that sort of fire ignited again, that's what Ron really brought to me. But that kind of sums Ron up. He was a playful cat. He was fun, but he was mischievous, and he'd always keep you on your toes.
That's absolutely wonderful, Ken. Now, of course, November 15th, 2015, everyone describes that like when the lights went out on George Street as the night the lights went out in St. John's. And of course, that's the day that Ron Hynes left us.
Mm-hmm.
What was going through your mind when you first heard the news?
I knew he wasn't doing well. I'd been talking to him and Boomer and his manager Charles. And I was actually, it was just after dinner time. I'd gone and I was working on the artwork for Later That Same Life. I designed the album. The cover illustration was done by Roger Smith, was it? Yeah, Roger Smith. But I had the illustration, and Ron was helping. I sent Ron a bunch of fonts. We were sort of looking at a bunch of old Dylan albums, trying to get the right coloring of the fonts. And so I'm sitting down, and I got my big computer monitor, and I got Ron's face blown up this big, and I'm moving the fonts around. Ron said he wanted this shade of blue, and I was trying to get it perfect. And moving everything around, I'm looking right into his eyes, and the phone rang, and I picked the phone up, and as I put the phone in the air, it was Charles McPhail, and he just said, "He's gone." And I went, "Fuck." And I put the phone down, and I'm staring right in Ron's face, and I just started to cry. It was it was amazing, but at the same time, it was so nice to be staring right into this portrait of Ron while I heard the news. Yeah.
That's just crazy. And that actually leads into my next question about Later That Same Life, and we recorded it a couple months just before he passed. What was that process like working on that final album for Ron?
It was... Ron had given me all the songs that had been recorded a year before, just really scratch demos when he could hardly speak. So his voice was very raspy and very weak at the time. And when they recorded the record, it hadn't gotten much better. And I wasn't involved in the recording of the record at all. It was kind of, I was around, I helped with the artwork, and I was going to try and play on it, but then in my eyes, those last batch of Ron songs are actually brilliant songs. And no offense to anybody involved, but I don't think the album did it justice. I think it could have. I think that had Ron not been dying, and had there been a better situation, that could have been a really brilliant piece of Ron Hynes recording. At the same time, I listened to it, and I love the frailty of his voice. I love the fact that he made a record as he was dying, and he told me the stories of those songs. I mean, those songs are beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I would have liked to have heard them in a different setting with Ron, from his earlier years when his voice was still really clear, and he had a good band with him, and everybody knew the songs, and it was nice because the songs are so strong. And I would have really liked to have seen them developed a little better. However, you're dying, you want to get it done, you do what you do. So for that reason, I also see it as a treasure. I know that when I listen to those old songs, I actually go back to the versions that Ron gave me as demos, because they're very sad to listen to. And I don't play them for anybody, because Ron said, don't ever play these for anybody, because his voice was really, really weak. But there's something about those early demo recordings that he sent me that there's a real beauty there. There's a real beauty there, yeah.
Because it's really raw and it's from his heart.
He just wasn't thinking about it, he had just written the songs. They were new, they were exciting to him, and he didn't care. He wasn't trying to capture takes, and there was just something really natural and beautiful about it. I love going back and revisiting those.
Yeah, for sure. Now, 2 years later, you actually recorded a collection of Ron Hynes songs yourself, and that eventually led to the A Good Dog Is Lost project. So tell me a little bit about how that project really first came to be.
Well, when I was touring with Ron, that was when my wife was diagnosed with MS, and he was actually one of the first people I told. And by the time Ron had died, my wife had gotten quite ill, and I was having to make a lot of changes in my life. And after Ron died, I put on a show called Hindsight, and it was just 20 Ron Hynes songs as a tribute. And I brought it out to a few theaters and did it with just myself and a bass player, Ken Grant, who plays with me now, because that was the way me and Ron played. And then when it came time to get ready to do another record, I was so emotionally stunted by what was happening with my wife that I wasn't having writer's block because I was writing, but the stuff I was writing I didn't feel like sharing because it felt like it had all been a little tarred with the paintbrush of her illness, and that wasn't something that I wanted to put out. But I needed to put something out, and I had all these Ron Hynes songs prepared, and I thought, well, maybe Ron tribute. But I was terrified of doing that because, Jesus, how do you do a tribute to Ron Hynes? So I reached out to Boomer and Kinsman and Sandy Morris and Ron's family as well to make sure that everybody would be okay with it. And everybody was very much behind it, which was fantastic. And I was kind of surprised, but very thrilled that they gave me their support. And then I just started putting it together, and I actually think it's a beautiful piece of work.
I agree.
I mean, the songs, you can't get better songwriting. And having, Amelia Curran makes a guest appearance on it, Sandy Morris is on it, Kinsman is on it. I've got some other musicians as well, and it's just a beautiful record, and it kind of, it's a weird thing when you do a collection of somebody else's tunes and then you play them for a couple of years because you kind of start to change your own persona a little bit because you get so. But I'm through that now, which is great. I'm back focused on my own stuff.
Yeah, totally.
But the Ron thing took me down a path, and I don't think there's been a show since Ron died where I haven't played at least one Ron Hynes song.
Yeah.
That's sort of part of my psyche right now is to continue the legacy of Ron Hynes to everybody that I can tell about.
Yeah, for sure. Because by the time we're recording this right now, you're doing a little mini tour of St. John's, playing a few shows at the Ship, and you got one tonight, the day we're recording this.
Yeah.
And you open up your first set with a couple of Ron Hynes tunes.
All Ron Hynes. The first set is 70 minutes or so of Ron Hynes songs. I think there's 13 of them. And then the second set, I get into my own solo stuff and the band stuff. And then the third set, we do sort of the best of Whiskey Wednesday, which is a set of covers, which includes everything from R.E.M. and George Jones through to The Clash and Charlie Pride. Old country, old punk, old Americana, some new wave stuff, some Boomtown Rats. I don't know what we're going to pull out. So it's a 3-tiered evening, and it's we did it last night at the Ship, and it was amazing. Yeah, what a hell
That's
of a
wonderful.
good time. Yeah,
awesome. Now, of course, you've been very public about your wife, Alison, and she's been dealing with MS for many years now. So how's she doing these days?
She's doing all right. She was diagnosed late in life at 48, and which is odd for multiple sclerosis, but it hit her really fast. And it was relentless. She went through all the medications and everything, and they finally said there's nothing else we can do. And we were looking at her, being in a wheelchair, possibly losing her eyesight, maybe losing some cognitive ability. There was all these other things. And they came to us with an idea of a stem cell bone marrow transplant, of which they, at the time, were still doing 8 a year. It was an experimental procedure. So we signed up for that, and we had to move to Ottawa for 6 or 8 months. She was in hospital for the entire time. They stimulate the bone marrow to grow, which is a painful process because the bone marrow actually breaks the bones as it's pushing out all of the platelets, and then they collect the stem cells from that. So that process is like a couple weeks. And then after they do that, they do chemotherapy, 3 different types of chemotherapy, radiation, another thing using rabbit hormones that they do. And this breaks down her immunity completely to like less than a child. No immune system left at all.
That's insane.
And at that point, when the immune system is gone, they then put her own platelets, her own white blood cells that they collected earlier back in, and that starts to regrow the nervous system and the immune system. And when the immune system comes back, it loses the MS trait that triggers MS attacks. So all of your MS attacks stop. But the process almost kills you. So, when I took her out of the hospital, she was 85, 90 pounds, couldn't walk, couldn't use her hands. I had to feed her. She couldn't even hold a glass of water. And that recovery stayed like that for about a year. And then she started to be able to walk a little bit again using a walker. But one of the things that we didn't know from all the treatments she had was that she had developed severe osteoporosis. So her hip exploded. And then she had to go back in for emergency surgery for that. And after that, they put her on 8 weeks of bed rest. And during that 8 weeks, the little bit of muscle she had left completely lost conditioning and became atrophied. And because she doesn't have the neural pathways back to rebuild the muscles, she's still on a very slow program of recovery. They're thinking it's going to be another 2 to 3 years before she, may be able to walk assisted. Yeah. But in the last 4 years, I've been basically home taking care of my wife. I've built a studio in the house and a little Whiskey Wednesday production studio. And it's all built around her, so she's in the center of everything. We've basically taken our entire life and just sort of made it very insular.
That's crazy.
And as horrible as it is, this debilitating disease that she has, we also have a great life, and we really like being together, and we like the life we've created. So,
And you spend a lot of time together, too.
We spend all of our time together now. And, we just get on, and it's made, I still used to like to do 100, 125 shows a year. Now I'm down to, I don't even know how many shows, but I've got to be very careful on when I go away because I got to arrange nursing and people to be with her.
Yeah, because you never know, right?
Well, you never know. And also, she still needs a lot of help. She can't get up and get a glass of water, right?
Yeah.
So she can't really turn over in bed on herself. Like, she needs help with all that stuff. So, and this is my first time coming out for a trip with the band since, it's been 4 years. And it was like, where am I going to go first when everything is okay? And it was like, I got to go back home. So this is a healing trip, and it's a vacation trip, and it's a work trip, and it's all these things. But the wife is doing great. It's a horrible situation that she has, but we're making the best of it, and we're doing really well. Yeah.
I thought I knew a thing or two about multiple sclerosis, but you just blew my mind with all you just talked about.
It's a wild disease.
Yeah, it must be difficult to deal with that, knowing that your wife's doing fine, and then you had all this happening in a 4-year span. It must be very difficult to deal with.
It hit really hard. In some ways, it was weird because we went into, the doctors talked to us about this isolation bubble that we needed to create, and I'd never heard the term before. And we did that a year before COVID hit. And, even when I'd leave the bubble to go out to a grocery store or something, I'd have on gloves and I'd be spraying everything I touched, and everybody's looking at me weird, and I'm wearing a mask. And then all of a sudden, because I was feeling very excluded from the world.
And then bam, COVID hit.
And everybody had a bubble. And everybody had masks, gloves, and sprays. And suddenly I was like, okay, I don't feel so bad now.
Yeah, you're more prepared than anybody.
I was more prepared. And then, COVID locked everybody away, and we were already locked away. So it was kind of like, okay, well, we're just going along with it. And I can't say how tough these last 4 years have been, but at the same time, I don't know. I got a lot of gratitude. Me and my wife, one thing that we started doing 4 years ago, just because things were so bad, was we had this idea that every night before we go to sleep, I would sit down next to her because she was in a different bed because of the hospitals and stuff, and we would each come up with one thing that we were grateful for that day. And it can be as simple as, I really like that peanut butter sandwich I had for lunch, or it could be something big that happened. But we had to each find one thing we were grateful for. And I tell you, putting that into your mind before you go to bed every night, that's changed my life. Just every day at the end of the day, looking back and having to find something you're grateful for in amongst all the crap. It's made myself and Allison very aware of the blessings, We all have something to deal with. We all have bad stuff. That's the story.
Oh yeah.
That's the story of life. If you picked up a book and you started reading it, and 10 pages in, everybody was happy and nothing was happening, you'd probably close the book. It's these stories that make our lives interesting. But it's also trying to be aware of what you can be grateful for at the same time.
For sure. Now, around the time COVID-19 hit, you formed your another band that you've been on the go now with ever since COVID-19 hit, and that's Ken Tizzard and Music for Goats. Now, how did that project get started?
The Music for Goats. So myself and Neil and Mr. Grant, that's the bass player and guitar player I had. We were hanging out a lot with a guy named Luc Mercier. Luc Mercier is a fiddle player, and we used to get together and jam all these old-time fiddle tunes. And I got a call for a show. It was called Yarns at the Mill. And they said, we want somebody to come down and tell some stories and play some songs. And I said, Yarns from the Mill, that sounds nice. I thought it was a storytelling thing. And I found out after it wasn't a storytelling thing, it was a sharing convention for all these yarn makers. And they wanted music for an hour in the afternoon. And I was talking to my fiddle player, Luke, like the day before the show, and I just found out what this was. And he said, well, what are we doing at this thing? I said, I had no idea. I said, we could be playing Music for Ghosts as far as I know. And as soon as I said it, I went, that's the name of the band now.
Boom, money.
And that's when the band became Music for Ghosts. But yeah, we did go out to this thing, and there was actually ladies and men sitting there with sheeps and Angora rabbits and all these things, and they're pulling the fur out, and they're spinning them, and they're making yarn from it, and they're all just making yarn while we're playing something. One of the weirdest shows I've ever done.
Oh, man. But are some of your favorite memories of being in the music industry, too, I'd imagine?
Oh, man. Some of the best memories aren't the biggest and best shows. It's the weird oddities, and that was definitely one of them.
Because those are the ones you remember the most.
Yeah. And especially when you get a story out of it, like a band name, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. Music for Goats, that's the weirdest thing. But I tell you, I get stopped more on the street when I got a Music for Goats shirt on, and people go, what the hell is Music for Goats? And I'm like, it's actually a band.
Wonderful. And that's actually spanned into a series you have called Whiskey Wednesday, which is actually turned into a show and a podcast.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration behind Whiskey Wednesday?
Well, when COVID did hit, like I said, I'd had a year experience, and in that time I'd done a lot of research on how to work remotely with people. So I decided that because I had some experience in being shut in, I would take that online for people who are new to it. And it started with just me and an acoustic guitar and one phone, with Facebook, and you press go live and play some songs. And I couldn't believe the response I was getting to it. So I started bringing the band in, and then I got some more phones for cameras and got a little switcher set up. And then as it stands now, we've got a full, ATEM switching system and 7 cameras, a full 24-channel board, lighting, the whole thing. We've got a set developed, and we do it every week. I have guests on it. I've had everybody from, I had Rick Mercer and Andrew Younghusband, Chad Richardson, Sean Panting, that's the Newfoundlanders that have been on it. But also Pursuit of Happiness, Matt Mays, everybody, William Prince, Dave Gunning, everybody I know, basically. I just call them and say, do you want to come on the show? And we have like a 20-minute Zoom conversation, and then they send me a couple songs of them playing, and that's become a regular feature on the show as well, and people love that. And then when things started rolling down from COVID, I thought, well, maybe it's time to stop doing this. And I started talking to some of these people, and there's a core group of about 50 people who are there pretty regularly. And they're still shut in, either through health issues or through anxiety issues or whatever. And this Wednesday night group, even though they don't know each other, they've all gotten to know each other over 2 years, and they get together and they make a drink and they sit down for Whiskey Wednesday and they talk to each other while I'm playing, and I tell stories, and it's not something that can stop. It sort of has a relevance right now.
Yeah, because once you build that following, there's really there's no point to stop.
Well, exactly, and the 30 to 50 people that are there every week, there's them plus the people that drop in, once or twice a month. So, during the live broadcast, there's a couple hundred people who watch, but in the following week, the reach goes out to about 2,000 from there.
Wow.
I mean, that's more people than I can hit when I'm on the road. I'm on the road driving and paying for hotels and playing for 30 people a night. I can do it in my living room. It's so I'm not going to stop it anytime soon. Especially now that the show's developing too. I'm saving up some money now to get a couple new cameras, a couple Blackmagic cameras, and then I'm going to keep developing the show. I'm loving having the guests on, and I'm getting more requests now for guests too. So it's sort of becoming a thing, right?
Awesome. Now, you're doing great work now. You have the Whiskey Wednesday show. You have Music for Goats, and I believe you're working on an album with them that's set to come out within the next couple of months or so. So, what else is next for Ken Tizzard?
Well, I really don't know, and I've kind of stopped planning. I spent a lot of my life planning for the future, planning to get ahead, planning tours, planning albums, and I realized that in this day and age, as an independent artist, all that planning is kind of for naught. For somebody in my position anyways. I'm sort of at a place in life where I get up, I wake up in the morning and I go to sleep at night. And between those two periods of time, if I can do things that I want to do and get things done that I want to do and be around people that I want to be around, that's a successful day for me. And often it has very little to do with furthering a music career. It just has to do with being personally happy. And that's kind of my goal these days. And music is the one thing that still brings me an awful lot of joy. So I can't imagine ever changing that. So, I'm going to make another record with Music for Goats. I'm talking to a few artists who want to make records as well. I might do some producing for them. I'm going to be staying, it'll be at least 2 years before I can fully get back to touring again, if I decide to.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I'll do things, I'll fly out to Winnipeg for a weekend and do a couple shows. I'll fly down to Newfoundland, do a couple shows. I've got places like the Philadelphia Folk Festival and stuff like that. I have invites waiting, so like when I feel like I can go back to Philadelphia Folk Fest some summer, I'll do that. I just can't go out and do the full-on touring like I used to.
Yeah, because you still got to take care of your wife.
Take care of my wife
and family.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Make sure that they're all right and they're okay. Well, Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure having you and talking to you again for the first time for me in 4 years. I mean,
yes.
But you are the first official guest of the Musical Connections podcast.
What a pleasure to be that.
Absolutely.
That's a real honor.
That's an honor you'll have now that no one can ever take away from you.
Yeah, exactly.
Ken, it's great to have you back on The Rock, and thank you so much for doing this. You have a wonderful day, and all the best to you with what's to come in the months ahead.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you, Zach.
There you go. That was my conversation with Ken Tizzard. You can find out more about Ken Tizzard through his various social media platforms and his website. That's going to do it for me for this video edition of the Musical Connections podcast. You can subscribe to this channel for more Musical Connections content and more bonus content as well. You can also subscribe to the Musical Connections podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts to. Make sure to leave a comment there because it helps out the show a lot. If you want to be a guest on the podcast in the future, simply email musicalconnectionsnl@gmail.com, and that'll be the same email you'll be going to submit your music for newfound releases. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've been your host, Zach Snow. Stay safe and please be kind to each other. And until next time, safe home.